Get out of here! You don't belong here! Please stop, I'm just a guest here. Get out of here! You don't belong here! Please stop, I'm just a guest here.
Ma'am, you need to leave right now.
Please, no, this is a mistake! Look at her, how pathetic.
What would you do if you walked into a room full of people who had already decided who you were? And instead of breaking, you stood there and refused to let them write your ending. And what happens when the most feared man in Korea decides that what was done to his wife in that ballroom was not something that time was simply going to smooth over? Welcome to Black Stories. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button and stay until the very end, because this one is going to hit differently. And before we go any further, if you have not watched part 1 of Vanessa's story, I need you to stop right now and go watch it first. The link is in the description below. Because what you are about to see, what Vanessa does next, what happens to every single person who stood in that ballroom and laughed, it only lands the way it is supposed to land if you understand where she has already been. Go watch part 1. Then come back. We will be right here. For those of you who did watch part 1, you remember exactly where we left off. Tae-jun had looked at his right-hand man park across a silent ballroom. Han Soo-min and Lee Min-ho were on their knees on the marble floor. The guests who had laughed and recorded and decided that Vanessa Carter was nobody worth protecting were standing completely still. Phones gone, voices gone, the comfortable cruelty of the evening dissolved into something they did not have a name for yet. And Tae-jun had said 2 words. Handle it. Then the screen went dark. What nobody in that ballroom knew was what those 2 words actually meant. What nobody watching part 1 knew was what the morning would bring. What kind of man Kang Tae-jun was when the room stopped watching. What Vanessa herself would decide when the noise died down and the wine dried and the night finally ended and she was left alone with everything that had happened to her. This is what came next. Vanessa did not sleep that night. She sat in the window of their residence on the 43rd floor for a long time after they returned, still in her coat. The ruined gown changed into something simple, a cup of tea in her hands that she had made and not drunk. The Seoul skyline spread out below her, all light and distance, quiet in the way that very large cities are quiet at 3 in the morning, not truly silent but settled, breathing slowly. Tae-jun had not pressed her to talk. That was one of the things she had loved about him from the beginning, his understanding of when words were not what was needed. He had sat with her for a while in that same quiet, close enough that she could feel his presence, not demanding anything from her, simply being there the way he had promised he would be. Eventually, he had gone to his study. She knew what he was doing in there. She knew the calls that were being made in the hours between midnight and morning, the quiet, precise movements of a man who had spent his entire adult life understanding how power transferred between people, and was now applying that understanding to a very specific situation. She knew all of it, and she did not stop him because she had not yet decided what she herself was going to do, and until she had decided, she did not want to interfere with the part of this that belonged to him. Because something had been done to her in that ballroom. Something that had a name and a shape and a legal definition, and it had been done in front of 25 witnesses and captured on multiple cameras, and it had been done because of who she was, because of the color of her skin, because people had looked at her and decided before she opened her mouth that she was less than. And Vanessa Carter, the daughter of a civil rights attorney who had spent her career making sure that the things done to people in rooms like that ballroom did not simply disappear into silence, was sitting in this window at 3 in the morning deciding what she was going to do about it. She thought about her mother. Her mother had told her once, when she was about 16, and had come home furious after an incident at school that had been minimized and explained away by people who found it convenient to minimize and explain things away. Her mother had sat across from her at the kitchen table in their house in Atlanta and said something that Vanessa had carried with her every day since. She had said, "The most powerful thing you can do when someone tries to make you invisible is to make yourself undeniable. Not loud, not angry, undeniable. Put your name on the record. Make them look at what they did in the full light of day. Because darkness is where that kind of cruelty lives and breathes and tells itself it is normal. Your job is to turn the lights on." Vanessa sat in the window until the Seoul sky began to change at the edges, the deep black softening toward gray, and she made her decision. She was going to turn the lights on. She found Taejun in his study at just past 5 in the morning. He was at his desk, jacket off, the room lit by the desk lamp and the blue light of his phone. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. He looked at her face and read it the way he always read her face, carefully and completely, taking in everything she was telling him before she said a word. She sat down across from him. "I want to file charges," she said. "Myself, not through you, not through your lawyers, not through anything that has your name on it as the reason it happened. Through me, in my name, because of what was done to me." He looked at her for a moment. "Kang Taewon is already." "I know what Taewon is already doing," she said. "I know what you have been doing in here since we got home. I am not asking you to stop. I am telling you what I am going to do alongside it." She held his gaze. "What happened to me in that ballroom was assault. It is on camera, and I want it on a legal record that has nothing to do with your name or your power or your network. I want it on record because of what it was, because of what they did. Because every woman who has ever stood somewhere and been treated the way I was treated tonight deserves to know that the system can work for her too." Taejun was quiet for a long moment. Something moved through his expression. That private warmth that most of the world never saw from him, that lived only in the spaces between them. "Kang Taewon will support you completely," he said. "Whatever you need." "I know," she said. She reached across the desk and put her hand over his for a moment. Then she stood up, went to their bedroom, and slept for 4 hours. The days that followed moved on 2 separate tracks simultaneously, and Vanessa was present on both of them. On the first track, she worked with Kang Taewon, the legal counsel, a sharp and meticulous woman in her 40s who had been with Taejun's organization for 11 years and who listened to Vanessa's account of that evening with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who understood exactly what they were building toward. They went through the footage together, every camera angle. Every moment from the second Vanessa walked through those ballroom doors to the second Taejun walked through them 2 hours later. Taewon watched all of it without expression, taking notes in her small, precise handwriting, and when it was finished, she looked up at Vanessa and said simply, "This is one of the clearest cases I have seen in 15 years. We will not lose this." Vanessa believed her. On the second track, which she did not participate in directly, but which she was aware of the way you are aware of weather moving toward you from a distance, the consequences of that evening were already spreading through Seoul's elite circles like something quiet and permanent. She heard about Han Byung-chul first. Taejun did not tell her directly. He did not sit down and deliver a report. But she heard things, in the way that you hear things when you are married to a man whose world leaves traces, in overheard calls and brief exchanges, and the particular silence that fell over certain conversations when she walked into a room. Han Byung-chul's distribution alliance, the one that had taken 4 months to build, was gone. Not just with Taejun. Every door that had been opened to him through Taejun's network had closed simultaneously and quietly, the way very permanent things close, without drama, without explanation, simply shut. Investors who had been returning his calls for years suddenly had scheduling conflicts that seemed to never resolve. Business partners who owed him favors discovered they had nothing available. The empire he had spent 40 years building was not destroyed. It was simply no longer growing, and in the world Han Byung-chul lived in, something that was no longer growing was already dying. She heard about Minho's family construction business next. Contracts that had been secured began to unravel, not loudly, not in ways that could be directly traced. Simply quietly, methodically, the way things unravel when the right people in the right rooms decide they would rather not be associated with a particular name anymore. Minho had grown up believing that his family's wealth was the floor beneath him, solid and permanent, impossible to shift. He was discovering, in those weeks after the ballroom, that floors built on other people's goodwill were not as permanent as he had believed. And Sumin's world changed in ways that were almost invisible and completely devastating. Invitations that had always come stopped coming. The charity board she sat on had a quiet restructuring, and her seat was not part of the new structure. The magazine that had been planning a feature on her family's philanthropic work discovered a scheduling conflict that pushed the piece indefinitely. The social architecture she had spent her entire adult life building, the lunches and the galas and the carefully maintained relationships that defined her world, began to develop small fractures that she could not locate or repair because they had no visible source. Nobody said Taejun's name. Nobody needed to. Vanessa watched all of this from a distance. She did not feel satisfaction exactly. What she felt was something quieter and more complicated. The particular feeling of watching the world correct itself, slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably, in the direction of something that was at least closer to right. But it was not enough, not by itself. The charges were filed on a Thursday morning. Vanessa walked into the police station with T1 beside her and gave her statement herself, in her own words, looking directly at the officer across the table from her, the way her mother had taught her to look at people in official rooms. Steadily, clearly, without apology, without performance. She described walking through those ballroom doors. She described the whispers and the comments and Soo-min's smile and Min-ho's words. She described the wine coming down across her dress. She described standing in that room surrounded by people and calling her husband and getting his voicemail and staying anyway. She described Director Choi and the security guards and the 5 minutes she asked for that nobody gave her. She said all of it clearly and completely, and when she was finished, she signed her name at the bottom of the document, and she felt something shift inside her that had been wound tight since the moment that wine hit her dress. The footage was submitted as evidence. All of it. Every camera, every angle, every word that had been said in that ballroom from the moment she arrived. Min-jun's comment about not belonging, Soo-min's smile. The exact moment Min-ho's hand closed around that wine glass and the decision moved through his eyes and he made it anyway. Director Choi telling security to move toward her. All of it documented, time-stamped, preserved. When the arresting officers arrived at Han Soo-min's apartment building on a Friday morning, she was not yet dressed for the day. She stood in her doorway in a silk robe and looked at them with the expression of someone who had been expecting something and had still not fully prepared for it to actually arrive. When they arrived at Lee Min-ho's office, he was in a meeting. His assistant knocked on the conference room door and said his name, and he came out into the hallway and saw the officers standing there, and the color left his face in the specific way it had left Min-ho's face once before, in a ballroom, on a night he was going to be thinking about for the rest of his life. Director Choi was brought in separately. All three of them stood before a judge 6 weeks after that Thursday morning. The courtroom was not large, but it was full. T1 sat beside Vanessa at the plaintiff's table, composed and precise, her notes arranged in front of her with the order of someone who had no doubt about how this was going to end. The footage played in its entirety. The judge watched all of it without speaking. The courtroom watched it with him, and the silence in that room was a different kind of silence from the silence that had fallen over the Grand Hana Hotel ballroom on the night Taejun walked through those doors. That silence had been fear. This silence was something else. The particular stillness of people watching something that cannot be argued with, something that simply is what it is, recorded and permanent and impossible to reframe. When it ended, the judge looked at the three people sitting across from Vanessa, and he spoke with the measured, official clarity of a man who had watched the footage and found it unambiguous. The charges were clear, the evidence was irrefutable, the record was permanent. Han Soo-min, Lee Min-ho, and Director Choi were convicted of assault causing bodily harm, criminal harassment, and filing a false disturbance report. The sentences included fines, community service, and a criminal record that would follow each of them into every professional room they attempted to enter for the rest of their lives. Vanessa sat at that plaintiff's table and heard the verdict delivered and felt something settle inside her that had been unsettled since the night she stood in that ballroom with wine drying into the fabric of her dress. Not triumph, not the hot satisfaction of revenge, something quieter and more lasting than both of those things. The feeling of her mother being right. Put your name on the record, turn the lights on. She had done exactly that. She stood up from that table, and she walked out of that courtroom with her head level and her shoulders back and T1 beside her. And she did not look back at the three people sitting behind her because they were not what this moment was about. This moment was about her. 2 weeks after the verdict, on a Saturday evening, Taejun told her to be ready at 7. He did not explain. He simply said it, in the way he said things that were not questions, and she looked at him and saw that thing in his expression again, the carefully contained warmth, the excitement he could never quite fully hide from her no matter how still his face was. She put on a dress, not the black gown, something new, something she had chosen herself, deep blue, floor length, with her hair down the way she wore it when she was not performing anything for anyone. The car took them to the Grand Hana Hotel. She looked at the entrance as they pulled up, the warm gold light, the white-gloved doorman, the same building, the same doors, the same lobby she had walked through alone on a night that felt both very recent and very far away. She looked at Taejun. He was watching her. "Same place," she said. "Different night," he said. They walked in together this time. The ballroom looked different and exactly the same. The chandeliers were lit the same way, throwing the same warm gold light across the same marble floor. The orchids were on the tables, white and perfect, the same flowers that had been there on the night everything went wrong. The violinists were in the corners of the room, the same quartet, and they were playing a song that she recognized immediately because it was one of her favorites, a song she had mentioned loving once in a conversation she had half forgotten. He had remembered. He had remembered all of it. The room was smaller this time, not 25 guests with their phones and their judgments and their comfortable cruelty. A small circle of people who loved her, her closest friend who had flown in from Atlanta, 2 colleagues she had known for years, a handful of people from Taejun's inner circle who she had come to know as her own over the course of their marriage. And at the back of the room, behind a curtain that was pulled aside as she walked in, a table with a cake on it. Her name on it, in the same handwriting as the note that had come with the dress. The candles were lit. Vanessa stood at the entrance of that ballroom and looked at all of it and felt something move through her chest that was too large and too full to have a simple name. She thought about standing in this same room with wine on her dress and 25 phones in her face, and not one single person stepping forward. She thought about the calculation she had been running her whole life about how to carry herself in rooms that did not want her. She thought about her mother's kitchen table in Atlanta and the thing her mother had told her about making yourself undeniable. She thought about staying, about refusing to leave even when every reasonable instinct said go, about what it had cost her to stand there and hold herself together and wait for the moment to change, about the fact that the moment had changed. Taejun was standing beside her. She could feel him watching her face, reading it the way he always read it, taking in everything she was not saying. She turned to look at him. There were things she wanted to say. There were words that felt equal to this moment, and she could not find any of them. She could only look at him and let him see everything in her face the way she had always let him see everything, without performing it, without managing it, just openly, fully, the way you look at someone you have chosen and keep choosing every single day. He took her hand. The violinists moved into the next song. And Vanessa Carter Kang walked into the birthday party that had been built for her, surrounded by people who knew exactly who she was, her head high and her heart full, into the evening that had been waiting for her all along. Some rooms try to tell you who you are. Vanessa had walked into a room that had made its decision about her before she opened her mouth, before she said a word, before she had done a single thing except exist in a space and refuse to apologize for it. And she had stood there. She had stood there covered in wine with 25 phones in her face, and not one person stepping forward, and she had refused to leave. Not because someone was coming to save her, because she had decided that her story was not going to end the way they wanted to write it. She had turned the lights on. She had put her name on the record. And then she had walked back into that ballroom on her own terms, in her own time, and she had let the evening be what it was always supposed to be. Some doors only open because you refuse to walk away from them. Vanessa Carter learned that on a night when everything went wrong in a room full of orchids and violin music and chandeliers that her husband had hung because he loved her. And she walked back through those doors, carrying every single piece of herself. Every single one. So here is what this story leaves with you. Vanessa did not wait for someone else to fight her battle. She stood in that courtroom in her own name, and she made them look at what they did in the full light of day. Is that the ending you were hopping for? Did Taejun handle it the right way? Did Vanessa get the justice she deserved? Comment below and tell me what you think. And if this story moved you, if Vanessa's strength moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. Subscribe to Black Stories, because there are more stories like this one coming, and some of them will change the way you see the world.
No matter how old I get, I'll always be my mom's little boy. No matter how I see myself, no matter how I change, she's always going to look at me the same. As this little creation of hers, she has to protect. As I get older, I think this is something I'm starting to forget. Because when she's calling, when she's texting, when she's trying to talk, she's not thinking of me as an adult. She doesn't see that I'm taller, hear the difference in my voice. She's trying to check in on her sweet little boy, trying to check in on her sweet little kid who used to need her for everything that he did. Because when it's your job to keep someone else alive, when to protect them from what they can't see, that's not something you turn off when they turn 18. She remembers more of me than I remember myself as a kid. Her life is a library of everything I did. She knows so much more of me to miss than I even remember about myself. And I think as the child, I see my parents differently. I think they start off as this authority and it changes as I'm no longer a kid, but I'm never going to outgrow the picture she has on her fridge. I'm always going to be her little boy. So be gentle with mom, because she was with you. And give her more time than you have, because she did that too. Because moms want to be needed. And you need a mom. How fortunate are you to be able to pick up that call?